Hello, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Guest from Aspie Dent. Today we're talking about processing issues and verbal communication. Many autistic people have difficulty processing incoming verbal information, but there are actually several possible different underlying issues that could be causing the problems. And clearly, if you want to help these people, you need to tailor your solution to their actual problem. So we're going to look at, first of all, the complexity of face-to-face communication. Most people are surprised at how complex this actually is. Then we're going to look at different types of processing issues. So some people have difficulty actually keeping up with that stream of words or processing the context beyond the literal meaning. It's well known, it's almost a stereotype that autistic people have problems with literal meaning of words. Well, yes and no. And some people have difficulty basically staying on track with what you're talking about because all these connections even from the first few words start going and going and going, and then they've lost the rest of the sentence. Let's start with the complexity of face-to-face communication. So somebody's talking to you. A lot of sound is coming in your direction that makes up words, sentences, and you've got to process those words for literal meaning. You can't go any further until you've got that literal meaning. You then go behind the literal meaning for context, for emotional significance. So, for example, somebody once told me that somebody had had their car stolen by somebody going in through their back door and taking the car keys. My immediate reaction was, well, that's a common way that people steal cars. 3 days later, I was feeling sorry for the guy whose car had been stolen, but it took 3 days to process beyond the literal meaning to the context and significance for the person for that event, and for me to start feeling sorry for them. So once you've managed that, hopefully in less than 3 days, you've got to formulate a reply. You take turns within the conversation, and then you've also got to monitor yourself, your reactions, how the person is responding to you. Are they understanding? Has what you've said just gone completely over their head? Which happens every time I talk IT. Are they understanding? Are they engaging? What's going on? And then you've got to process information regarding emotion. Now, for most people, this means processing facial expression, body language, tone of voice. Many autistic people, a surprisingly large number of autistic people, in fact, sense emotion directly. But quite often, because they're struggling to keep up with all the words, they can't manage to process either their emotion or your emotion at the same time. So let's look at what happens when somebody has difficulty keeping up with the stream of words. Some people, they won't be able to even process all those words. They might only catch a few words in the sentence and try to build up the meaning from that. In more extreme cases, they might not be able to process any of those words in real time, and processing might occur minutes, hours, days, or months later. In some cases, the processing actually happens without them even being aware of it. And suddenly the knowledge and information comes out that they were never aware of actually ever receiving. Some people are able to disguise their difficulties by basically using patterns and word frequencies for a particular topic to make an educated guess at the meaning, but that only works when the topic of conversation is very familiar. And confusingly with this, because the person is struggling to keep up, they might think that they've actually understood, might even have written notes, but when they come back and look at it, they realise they haven't got a clue what the person said. And this usually happens when the topic is unfamiliar. So for instance, if you have a legal problem and you phone up a legal advice line, and the legal person gives you lots of legal advice. Now, because legal topics are not familiar, the law is not familiar, you might think you've understood as they've gone on, and the person might think that you've understood because you've given all the right responses, but actually, when you put the phone down and you look over it, you realise you haven't understood. And it's because the topic is unfamiliar. So let's say that you have actually managed to process some words. Problem is that it takes effort to get behind that literal meaning to the context, to the emotional significance of what the person's trying to convey to you. And a lot of autistic people cannot do that. They're just stuck with the literal meaning, unless you write it down and give them time to think about it. Or they might, in the example I gave, give you the literal meaning at the time, but then give you the real one 3 days later. Now, an interesting thing happens with pattern matching. because if the topic is really well known, and it's a topic that people often talk about, maybe because it's familiar with education or work or just something that the family does frequently, then that pattern might actually include some contextual information as well, so that you kind of build up a set of scenarios around a topic, so that if this is happening and this is what people are saying, then it's likely that they're thinking this. And that can be very deceptive, because it makes you think that the person is actually really, can really do this conversation business, when actually that they're just kind of winging it, faking it, sort of trying to muddle through. A completely different issue is people who can actually manage to grab that literal meaning. So they've got there, they fall over at the point at working out what the context is. And the problem is, if they've got the start, they've got a phrase, but their brain, as all people's brains do, go off on association. So looking at the diagram we've got here, the topic might be about eggs, but it might be about going and getting some eggs from the shop. But they missed a bit from the shop because they've got an egg which associates with a hen, and they might have had a holiday on a farm where there were hens. So they're thinking about that holiday in the fields and countryside walks during that holiday. And meanwhile, they've lost a bit about going and buying the eggs. They haven't got any further than the eggs. But they've got the context, just happens not to be the right context. And as a consequence, people think that these people don't listen, that they're not interested. But actually, it's a core problem with the way their brain works, that the connections or the associations from one topic to another, to another, to another, which everyone's brain does, aren't inhibited. So they stay equally strong, so they keep going. Whereas most people's brains will only go one or two, and then you get a very strong inhibition kind of effect that gets stronger and stronger the further you go. So that's why it doesn't happen to everyone, just to a few people. So what kinds of solutions can you have with people who struggle to take in verbal information? Well, it depends on the actual difficulty. If the speed of processing is the problem, slow down. Keep sentences simple and pause to allow people to catch up. Now, if processing is going to take minutes, months, days, you'll just need to talk and then kind of hope for the best. Strangely enough, even though people are having difficulty taking in verbal information because of processing issues, a number of autistic people will be helped if you use visual aids. Now, this seems to be completely contradictory, because if you're having processing issues, why add some more processing? But the reason is that people have preferences for a channel on which they like to take in information. And for some autistic people, the visual input actually takes priority. So if you can use that visual input to kind of go with the words, they will actually understand better. Other things you can do is write things down, draw diagrams, depending on how they prefer to learn. And another thing that you can try is actually allowing them to record it so that they can listen to it later, which will aid processing. And a key thing to remember is that even if a conversation with somebody is actually impossible because of their processing issues, because they can't process things in real time, or even because they can't get the context, do not assume that the autistic person is not taking in the information, is not learning, is not capable of learning. Because you have no way whatsoever of knowing what anyone is absorbing in their own time when you're not there. And quite a lot of the input that you have, or the input that they get from school, may well be processed well afterwards, and they will learn. The key then is trying to figure out how to get them to tell you what they've learnt. So thank you for watching and listening. We do appreciate feedback, and you can ask questions in the comment section.